welcome back to another Reddit readings video. If you enjoy these stories, don't be scared to leave a like. Now, do be scared. Sit back, relax, and enjoy. I just wanted to go home. I had been walking home after the late shift with my head down. In that post-work days where all you can really think of is eating some food and vegging out, when I met her. Oh, there you are, babe. I turned around to see a pretty young woman rushing toward me, arms wide open. I stumbled back as she wrapped herself around me, my hands still stuffed in my jacket pockets. Please, help me. Someone is following me, she whispered, looking up at me with panic in her eyes. I glanced behind her and saw a silhouette approach, then paused just before they entered the glow of a streetlight. Do you see? She hissed, releasing her grip on me. Yeah, I murmured, staring straight at the person to let them know I could see them. I hoped this would be enough to turn them away, but they remained motionless. Will you walk me to my place? It's not far, I promise, she asked. Yeah, of course. I didn't like turning my back on her pursuer. As we walked, I strained my ears to listen for approaching footsteps. Every so often I glanced back, unnerved to see them each time, always avoiding the light and standing in the shadows, still and silent. Are they still there? She tugged on my sleeve. Yeah, they are. Listen, I don't know if we should walk straight to your place. Then they'll know where you live, I said, stealing another glance behind us. We should try to lose them somehow. She looked up at me, and I watched her cycle through expressions as she tried to decide if I was trustworthy. We can go to a place with more people around, I added, hoping I hadn't alarmed her. Look, there's a diner a few streets over. We can sit down, wait a while, make sure the coast is clear before we leave. Are you hungry? No, but that's fine with me. It's freezing out here, she replied after a few moments. We crossed the street at the next intersection. I looked back to see the figure still standing on the other side, watching as we disappeared around a corner. I quickened the pace, practically dragging her along. Once we made it inside the relative safety of the diner, I picked us a booth away from the windows, but at an angle that I would be able to see if anyone walked by. After our waitress dropped off our menus and glasses of water, my new acquaintance appeared to relax a bit, though her hands were still so shaky that she had to use both of them to sip her water. We sat in silence, and I kept my eyes on the window. I'm really sorry I ruined your night, she blurted after a while. I panicked. No, not at all. Totally fine. I'm glad you said something. That was definitely sketchy, I assured her. She looked down at the table, and we went back to uncomfortable silence. Not wanting to keep her from getting home, I eventually came up with a suggestion. Look, I could call you a cab or something, get you a ride home. That way you know that creep won't be able to follow you. She didn't look up and address the table. Her response took me aback. I don't know if it would even matter. What do you mean? She sighed, bringing her hands to her face and rubbing her eyes. It will still be out there somewhere. She spread her fingers open, peering at me from behind them. Yes, them. I don't know anymore. Okay, look, how about you fill me in on what exactly is going on here? I snapped. She dropped her hands. Her lip quivered like she was fighting back tears. I softened my expression and apologized, but she waved it off. They were far away when it started, far enough that I didn't think much of it. Just someone in the corner of my eye, really. At first I thought it was just me imagining things. It took a while for me to realize that I was being stalked. I narrowed my eyes at her, wondering just what I'd gotten myself involved with. It just kept getting closer, she continued, and it got so close I could almost see it clearly, and I knew it wasn't right. The situation was taking a turn I hadn't anticipated. There was no denying that someone appeared to be following her, but the rest of her story made me question her lucidity. I chose my next words carefully. Why don't you tell me what you think you saw, and I'll try to help you. And if I can't, I'll find someone that can. She pulled back instantly, regarding me suspiciously. I'm not crazy. I know what I saw, she replied sharply. All I'm saying is that your eyes can play tricks on you when you're afraid, I countered. No, it wasn't human. It was like it was the absence of a person, like where someone should have been. There was just no one. I was so scared, and I knew it couldn't be real. But then, you saw it too. I did see someone. That part is accurate. But I didn't see anything that made me think that they were. I trailed off as something caught my peripherals. Outside the window there had been a nearly imperceptible movement, but as I squinted toward it, I could make out the vague outline of a figure in the alley across the street. She followed my gaze, twisting in her seat. It's there, isn't it? She breathed. I nodded, gritting my teeth. Wait here, I said, rising from the booth. "No, don't go out there," she exclaimed, her eyes wide. I ignored her and pushed through the door, adrenaline pumping through me. "Hey, I can see you," I called, entering the road, my knuckles curling. The silhouette stood its ground. I was nearly across the road when headlights approached, washing over me just before the vehicle swerved out of the way. "Get out of the road, asshole," the driver yelled out the window before blaring the horn and speeding away. In those few moments, her stalker had managed to disappear from sight. I scanned the darkened alley, moving forward cautiously, expecting them to leap out at me at any second. But there was no one there, and there was no one on the sidewalk either. For the first time that night, I felt genuine fear. I hustled back to the diner, this time checking for traffic first. As I approached the door, I found the booth sitting empty, a wad of crumpled bills sitting on the edge of the table. Cursing, I searched the streets for any sign of her, to no avail. It had been an unsettling night, and by then I was completely baffled. What exactly had happened? I forced myself to slow down and assess things logically. I didn't really know what to think. I could almost have written it off as the antics of a very paranoid woman, except for the fact that there had definitely been somebody in the alley, and it did appear that they had been following her. Then I realized that I had never gotten her name. She hadn't asked mine, and I hadn't asked hers. This seemed odd to me, considering the bizarre interaction we had just shared. Was this some kind of elaborate con? Had she been working with someone else to distract me? My mind went back to how off guard I'd been when she embraced me, and I felt for my wallet. It was still there, and everything was still inside it, so she hadn't robbed me. Still, the whole thing didn't sit right with me. I couldn't let it go, so I decided to wander the streets in the hopes that I'd catch sight of her again. I pulled my hood tight and headed back in the direction we had come from, still trying to piece the puzzle of this evening together as I trudged along. I hadn't been walking for very long when I saw a group of friends smoking outside of a pub. "Hey, excuse me," I greeted them as I approached. "You didn't happen to see a friend of mine go by?" I had been trying to think of the best way to describe her, but the group ignored my presence entirely and continued to joke among themselves. "Excuse me, sorry to bother you all." I tried again, "but I'm looking for someone who..." There was a murmured agreement that they should head back in, that it was too cold to stand out there any longer. And with that, they filed back inside without so much as a glance in my direction. Everything about this evening had been off, but this was unbelievable. There was just no reason for an entire group of people to pretend I didn't exist. Or was there? It was the absence of a person. I froze, her words entering my brain suddenly. But that was preposterous, wasn't it? I peered at my reflection in the pub window, certain of my existence. But now I was overcome with the need to get someone to acknowledge me. I reached for the pub door. I could feel it in my hand, but it wouldn't budge. I pushed and pulled, but the door wouldn't open from either direction. I'd have thought it was locked if I hadn't just seen it swing open seconds before. It was then that I knew something was wrong. Whatever this world is, whatever plane of existence I had come from, I quickly realized that I was not a part of it anymore. No one could see me, no one could feel me, no one could hear me, and I could no longer interact with any physical objects that I hadn't already been carrying. As the early morning sun began to rise, I was still desperately trying to get anyone's attention. For all my efforts, I was awarded nothing. The most I was able to do was get trapped in my building's stairwell after trying to follow a neighbor inside. To my dismay, I hadn't caught up with them before the door at the top of the stairs swung shut, and I was forced to wait there until another neighbor came down the steps on their way to work. Being outside was better, even if I could still feel the whipping wind. At least out there I couldn't get stuck anywhere. For the first few days I felt hunger and thirst, but the longer I stayed, the less I felt. Eventually I grew numb to these sensations. Even the stinging cold became bearable. Gradually, I came to accept my fate, however cruel, however impossible it all seemed. It had probably been weeks. By then I had lost all sense of time when I met another like me. I had been sitting in the frozen park late at night, trying to remember what it was like to be real. I didn't react to the shadow that loomed in front of me, expecting it to belong to yet another person who couldn't see me. It was only when it halted that I bothered to look up. They were much like the silhouette I had seen on that fateful night, and my breath caught as I tried to find a face that wasn't there. Something darker than total blackness stared back at me, and I wondered if I appeared the same way to them. "Do you see me?" I tried asking for it. "Yes," I nearly choked, searching for words, trying to figure out what question to ask next. What happened to us?" The figure gave a dry laugh. "Seems we're dead, doesn't it?" It had crossed my mind a few times, but hearing something else say it was worse. Only then did it feel real. "But how?" I cried. The stranger snorted. You mean you don't remember how you died? No, do you? Yeah, God lured here, just like you. What do you mean? The figure gave a long sigh before sitting beside me on the bench. Haven't been like this for long, have you? I shook my head. Well, here's how it works. As you might have noticed, most people can't see you, and you can't do a thing to make them. But there are a couple of exceptions. They're just really rare to come across. What are the exceptions? Well, there are the gifted types, it said, pointing a non-finger to the middle of where their forehead would have been. And then there are folks who are on their way here, on the way here, like dead. Precisely, I processed this information for a while, trying to think back to the night I'd disappeared. She'd been able to see the dark figure, and so had I. I drew a sharp breath, the revelation slowly dawning on me. Dakar, it must have hit me when, not quite, the stranger interjected. You never actually died. Whoever took your place managed to swap places with you right before you would have. Right place, right time. Nearly impossible without the help of someone living. So she tricked me. I scoffed, incredulous. Why would she do that to me? Who knows, eh? People do crazy things for all sorts of reasons. You know, point is, don't bother dwelling on reasons here. They don't matter much. Good luck finding your way back. Not many of us ever do. With that, the absence of a person strode away, leaving me to come to grips with what I'd been told. I knew I'd never find her again. Whoever she was, whatever she wanted, it didn't matter. She had gotten what she needed, and she was long gone. It took some time, but I learned that I had to accept that. I learned that I had to let it go. It seemed the only way I'd ever make it back was to remain vigilant, to notice anyone who gave me the slightest glance. So I wandered, aimless, directionless. For how long, I can't say. Time doesn't really seem to matter as much here. You kind of forget about it after a while. All I can say is that one day, my efforts paid off. One day I found my ticket back after searching for so long. So I thank you, my friend, for the opportunity. I've been able to see bad intentions in people since I was a kid. I still couldn't save my classmates from my teacher in town. Bad intentions can take several forms. Depending on what it is, it can either be smoke curling around someone, like a storm cloud brewing, or something more nefarious. Smoke is simple. I see slight wisps of it around a person, or hanging around in the air. That's a basic bad intention, like cheating on a test or considering being rude to someone. I'm okay with smoke. I can usually ignore it. Sure, it kind of has a scent which makes me feel nauseous, but it's tolerable. That kind of intention is normal. I'm pretty sure if I looked in a mirror, it would be around me too when I'm in a bad mood. On the other side of the spectrum is the kind I can't deal with. It is an intention which haunts a person and will not let them go, will not get out of their mind until they have satisfied that disgusting, vile thought. It is poisoned emotion and feelings compiled into one bleeding black monster wrapping itself around its victim's neck. Pain, joy, lust, anger, it was all of them. A vicious cocktail of human emotion creating something horrific. It can be triggered by something, trauma, for example, but no matter what, it is always there waiting, faint, but still noticeable. I used to think they actually were monsters, that they were responsible for the bad things people did. But then I came to realize it wasn't a monster. What I saw was part of the person. It had been part of them since they were born, a sour, slithering shadow bleeding from them. It is impossible to cut away, to detach, like a shadow, and it follows people everywhere, whispering into unsuspecting minds. Whether or not the person acts on it, the color will either darken or fade. Most of the time it gets darker, but I've seen it fade. I'll use simple bad intentions as an example. When I was 5 years old, I was shopping with my mother and she didn't have enough cash for groceries. She smiled at the cashier and did the walk of shame back to the milk aisle, pulled the whole milk carton out of her cart and paused before putting it back on the shelf. I'd seen the smoke before we even went into the store. When she was strapping me into the back seat, I'd noticed a gray plume dancing around her. I wasn't scared of it. If anything, I thought it was pretty, giggling to myself. "Mommy, what's that?" I pointed to the smoke, enveloping my fingers in it. It reacted to my touch, black tendrils dancing around me. Mom twisted around, searching for something which wasn't visible to her. She looked right past it. "What is it?" "Sweetie, there's nothing there." The smoke had gotten darker as we got closer to the store, and when Mom was frowning at the carton, halfway to putting it back on the shelf, she took a moment to glance at her bag. I saw the exact moment the thought entered her mind, and the smoke around my mom tightened itself around her. It wasn't fun to look at anymore. I squeezed my eyes shut and tried to look away. When I did, Mom was sighing, putting the carton back on the shelf, and grabbing my hand. On the way out of the store, the smoke faded until it was nothing but tiny sizzles of electricity sparking out. See, that is the intention that starts off bad, but strong minds can fight it. My mom wanted to steal the milk, but she forced her way through that thought and put it back. I've seen really bad intentions too. I want to tell you everything in as much detail as possible, but writing about this is hard. Still though, I need to give you some background, right? Or what I'm going to tell you is going to sound insane. I've only ever seen really bad intentions a few times in my life, so I've kept away from it. I've glimpsed it in passing, an old man frowning at a stray cat, a little girl glaring at her mother standing in front of traffic. But I don't look further. I just keep walking and pretend not to see it. There was a point where I couldn't avoid it. I didn't know my kindergarten teacher had bad intentions. She was called Mrs. Jess. She had pretty hair which smelled like apples when she picked me up, and she told jokes we all laughed at. Being so young, I knew seeing smoke was a bad thing. But what about something which was even more terrifying? Something which stopped me in my stride and elicited a shriek clawing in my throat. I didn't mean to catch her. I mean, it was Mom's fault. After class, she made me go back into class to grab my macaroni statue I made. I'd knocked it over and messed it all up. But Mom insisted on seeing my creation. So, being a stubborn 6-year-old, I'd stomped back up my kindergarten steps and pushed open the doors with way more force than necessary. Stepping into my kindergarten classroom, I automatically felt a sense of dread building in my gut. The lights weren't on, and the smiley face paintings we'd all made looked eerie in the dim glow of the setting sun through wide windows. Ignoring my squirming gut, I ran over to my seat where my macaroni statue still half stood in all of its clumsy glory, slightly tipping to the side. Gathering it into my arms, I made a quick escape, eager to get back to Mom. Before I could make it to the door, a sharp cry rang out and I stumbled to a stop, almost tripping over my shoes. Mom was on the other side of the door, I thought. She was going to hug me and tell me everything was going to be okay. But somehow I found myself moving backwards, my gaze searching the air for smoke. It was always there when something bad was about to happen or had already happened. I saw it immediately, hanging in the air like black slime. There was a trail, spatters on the floor, bleeding black leading me further down the hallway until I found the source at the very end. Mrs. Jess. She was standing with a bright smile on her face, and she was wearing her favorite dress. She still had the plaits in her hair, the ones I'd tried to do at lunchtime. I was already smiling, the knot in my gut starting to unravel. I opened my mouth to greet her, but the words choked in the back of my throat when I saw it. It was huge, a slithering snake of pitch darkness wrapped around her throat, dripping onto her white dress and tainting her legs. Its tendrils gagged her smiling mouth and pulled it into a foul grimace which sent me stumbling backwards. It was everywhere. The monster swarmed her, enveloping my teacher's face. It wasn't just blanketing Mrs. Jess, but the hallway. Puddles of slime I had to fight not to accidentally step in. The teacher's smile broke through the sour-smelling beast crawling around her. I had to cover my mouth and nose. The stink was putrid. It was sour milk and rotten food creeping into the back of my nose and twisting my gut. Cassandra, she said my name in question like always. Her voice was no different, sweet and flowery, what I had trusted. And yet I could see who she really was. I could see what she was hiding. Behind her, the door was open. In the distance, her car engine rumbling. Cassandra, are you okay? I didn't move. I couldn't, cringing away from the pooling black puddle on the floor creeping towards me. I didn't understand why Mrs. Jess was a bad person until the door she was standing next to opened. The boys' bathroom. A smaller figure appeared hand in hand with a stranger. I couldn't even see the man through the darkness choking him. He was nothing but a twitching darkness with a tight hold around Wendy Lily's hand. From the frightened look in my classmates' eyes, I knew the stranger wasn't her father. I started to scream. Maybe it was because of the darkness growing around me, consuming everything, including Wendy. Or because my kindergarten teacher had grabbed my arm with far too much force, her facade crumbling. Luckily, I got my mom's attention and she called the cops before Mrs. Jess and the stranger could drag Wendy away. I later found out years later, over breakfast where my mom read it in the newspaper, that my teacher had lost her own daughter several weeks before and had intended to steal Wendy away for herself. Mrs. Jess had served 5 years in prison before dropping that bombshell, before taking her own life. The monster I saw that day was the first time I saw the kind of intention which can poison your mind until you can't think straight. until you have to satisfy and feed that craving. I'm not here to talk about the incident in kindergarten. I want to talk about something which happened recently, what I'm still coming to terms with. I grew up mostly ignoring bad intentions, either because they're only light or I really didn't want to get involved. The kind of bad intention which you have no way of stopping. A kid pushing her mother into incoming traffic, an old man taking a cat home and suffocating it with his recently deceased wife's favorite scarf. How am I supposed to stop things like that? I can't see what they're going to do, only if the want is strong or weak. There was a time when I tried to stop bad things happening. It was never a monster, just smoke a little darker or what looked like a storm cloud. When I was 14, I followed a teenage boy home when I saw the dark cloud above his head. I was convinced he was going to kill someone or cause serious hurt. The boy had stopped halfway down the street and pulled out his phone. Glaring at the screen, he'd pressed the phone to his ear and cleared his throat loudly. "Hey, Mom." His voice was choked up. "Yeah, hi, Dad's fucking Aunt Maura." His lips pulled into a grin. "Okay, bye." Since then, I've been hesitant to try and stop people acting out on bad intentions. If it was just smoke, it really could have been anything. I was thinking about the consequences of that boy calling his mom and spilling that kind of invasive information. Halfway through Mr. Asher's detailed explanation on artificial intelligence, it was English class, but someone had asked if AI was ever going to take over the world, and that had plunged the class into a discussion which went from aliens to artificial intelligence, and then somehow to fighter jets and airplanes. Mr. Asher was an avid enjoyer of aircraft of any kind, I'd noticed. He had posters on the walls of anything from a 21st century airplane to a weird robot thing which looked straight from a sci-fi movie. What is the most important part of an aircraft? His voice snapped me out of my thoughts, and I lifted my head from where I'd been meticulously doodling Adventure Time characters in the back of my notebook. I had been battling a headache for most of the day. After hoping it would disappear on its own, I swallowed a Tylenol with half a bottle of flat Coke, and it was yet to have an effect. I figured staring at my desk would help, but a dull pain was already crawling across the back of my skull. "Anyone?" Mr. Asher urged the class with a sigh. "Come on, guys. This is preschool stuff." Fourth period English was usually the time I tuned out of class. It's not like we learned anything. Mr. Asher just ranted about future mechanical weapons and AI replacing the US Army. Riveting stuff. Most of my class were either half asleep or buried in their own work. Still though, some kids were listening, mainly the girls. The teacher was easy on the eyes, let's say 40 or 50 something years old with an actual jawline and Hollywood smile. He looked good for his age. Of course the girls were listening to his rant. I jumped when Mr. Asher clapped his hands, snapping the class out of it. "Come on, wake up. Most important part of an aircraft." "Do you mean like a plane?" Milla Jason raised her hand awkwardly. "The wings." "Yes, Milla," Mr. Asher said. "Wings. I'm glad someone is listening. But what else? Come on, I'm talking about the power of the ship. The craft would have no chance of moving without it." When there was no response, Mr. Asher clicked his fingers in front of a girl's face. I was half listening, shading my jig in. I'd drawn his face weird. He looked more like a deformed Squidward. "Wake up, Marina. What have I told you about sleeping in class? Join in the discussion. Let's get some energy. Why aren't we doing English?" Kai Oliver spoke over kids yelling out ridiculous answers. "This is English, and we're supposed to be studying the Crucible. So, why have we spent the last hour and a half talking about your weird obsession with planes?" He was right. I mean, Mr. Asher really did make his obsession obvious. He inserted that particular subject into every discussion. Kai's words sent a shockwave through the class. Some kids laughed. Others muttered that he was rude. I expected the teacher to start shouting at him. There was a pause, a moment of silence when I could hear my individual breaths as I struggled to mend my Princess Bubblegum's hair. "That is very true." Mr. Asher cleared his throat. "And we will, Kai. But first of all, why don't you answer my question first?" I'm not sure why, but the teacher's words had weight to them, a second meaning. His tone was different, and I couldn't figure out what it was. So, the teacher's footsteps startled me, the click-clack of his shoes making his way over to the back of the class where Kai was sitting. I was a few seats away from the kid. As Mr. Asher got closer, my pencil slipped from my fingers. I thought it was a fluke. I thought maybe a sandwich had gone bad in my bag, or some idiot had brought in sour milk. But no, the smell was suddenly there, real, a putrid aroma suddenly choking the air, creeping into my nostrils and burning my throat. I had to slam my hand over my mouth to stop myself puking. I felt my body stiffen up, my breath growing thinner and thinner as the teacher's footsteps stopped in front of my classmate's desk. I heard the creak of Kai's desk when Mr. Asher leaned on it. "Why don't you tell me?" I didn't dare look up. Just for a moment I wanted to be blissfully unaware, but when my gaze went to my lap, my eyes were already wandering. I saw his shoes first, expensive leather slip-ons. As my gaze traveled up, I saw it. I saw writhing darkness blurring my teacher from reality completely, wiping out his face. His body was the only thing left, along with half of his head swallowed and the monster's tendril snaking around his throat and shoulders, slithering tendrils already restraining his wrist. The air was thick with the foul stink already traveling around the classroom. It didn't touch other students. Focusing on my teacher, I could just about glimpse a patch of Mr. Asher's face peeking from the abomination blanketing him. I could see what nobody else could, and what had been highlighted by the thing. His smile, which was far too big for his face, almost cartoonish, a nightmarish grin growing and growing and growing on his face. The thing was pulling at his lips, fashioning them into a horror spectacle. "Mr. Oliver," the amalgamation of writhing shadows said, "what is the most important part of an aircraft?" I could feel myself moving back in my chair, my body physically reacting to what I was seeing. My throat burned, a cry clawing to get out, hysteria tangled on my tongue. "The pilot, obviously," Kai said, his voice slicing through my hurricane thoughts. For a moment I was confused why he wasn't jumping up and freaking out, pointing at the nightmare which was our teacher. And then reality settled in. Kai couldn't see the bad intention. He couldn't see what the teacher was thinking, what was emitting from him, a sickening urge which was driving him crazy. It was a craving, a lust to do the unthinkable, and I had no idea what the unthinkable was. It could have been anything, murder, or worse. It had to be that bad. The monster wouldn't be there if it wasn't something that would cause injury or death. Whether that was mentally or physical, Mrs. Jess's bad intention was to kidnap my classmate and make the little girl her own daughter, and the monster had been bad. This was worse. This thing was sending my lunch into my throat, turning my gut. When I risked to look up, it was everywhere, a sentient tendril of darkness worming its way around the classroom, burying itself into the walls like mold. I found my gaze latched onto the two of them, student and teacher, as they seemed locked into a staring match. Kai with a slight smirk, and Mr. Asher with intrigue. Kai was the smartest in the class. Usually, he kept quiet and to himself, but his intelligence couldn't be hidden in skyrocketing test scores worthy of an Ivy League school. "That's right." Mr. Asher backed away, his arms folded across his chest. The darkness followed him, growing thicker and thicker the more he was thinking, the more his thoughts were growing more twisted in his mind. And that craving was getting worse. "Tell me, Kai, would you ever pilot a craft?" As my teacher's bad intention was getting worse and far more realistic, a tangible thing he was starting to plan in his head. The smell went from sour milk to rancid burning and something dead, something rotten. I could see every fucking emotion on the patches of face still showing through writhing black. He was planning, and that plan that he was putting together in his head was exhilarating him, so much so that the teacher began to tremble with excitement. "Look away." The word struck me. Look away, but I couldn't. I couldn't look away because I wanted to know. I wanted to know what was going on in his mind. What was so vile that his bad intention was enveloping him, transforming him into a beast from my childhood nightmares. Kai raised a brow. Me. He leaned on his fist, clearly contemplating. "No," he laughed. "I'd probably crash it." "Nonsense." Mr. Asher spoke with such vigor and excitement. To any other person, he was just excited. "Why do you think that?" He leaned forward, anticipation igniting in his expression. I'd never seen him so excited. It was sickening. I've read about people who have openly said they want to know what goes on inside a psychopath's brain and leads them to commit the atrocities they do. Trust me, though, you don't. You won't see logic or explanation to why they did it, because it doesn't exist. This isn't sickness. It's not something which should be studied. It's a craving which can't be explained, a tumor which grows and grows and grows until it is all-consuming. And I see all of it. I see it from the start to finish. I saw it in my English teacher, Mr. Asher, who had managed to hide it so well until something triggered it, bringing out his demons and showing me everything he was thinking. Everything except what he was planning to do to Kai Oliver. You're the first person this year to be recommended to an Ivy League, Mr. Oliver, and you're worried you wouldn't be able to pilot a craft. Kai shrugged. Well, it depends which craft, he said, before picking up his battered copy of The Crucible and waving it in the teacher's face. Can we actually study now? Not that I don't love talking about planes, but we need to do actual work. For a moment, I thought the teacher was going to argue before he nodded and stepped away. Quite right, he said before resuming the discussion he'd started right at the beginning of the class. I watched him walk back to the front of his class and slump back into his desk. He picked up the crucible and started to read, but his planning wasn't ending. His thoughts were so loud, perpetuated in the stink in the air, and shadows swallowing him up until he was nothing but a blur of black. I buried my head in my knees and forced myself to breathe. I had to stop it. Whatever it was, whatever he was planning, I had to stop it. It's not like I could go to the police and tell them I was seeing bad intention on my teacher. I'd be sent to the psych ward. So I followed Kai Oliver around. It sounds stalkerish, but I was determined to make sure he wasn't a victim of bad intention. Kai Oliver was boring. I'll just say that. After class, he went to the library for a study period. I sat opposite him and pretended to read from the crucible. He spoke to me twice. The first time was to let me know that I was reading my book upside down, and the second was a while later. He lifted his gaze from his copy, a small smile curving on his lips. "You're following me." "No, I'm not." "Yes, you are." Kai closed his book. "You followed me from Mr. Asher's class, and now you're doing a bad job of pretending to read a book." He cocked his head. "What is it? Do you want me to tutor you or something?" "That's what other kids want." "Other kids?" He nodded. "I was stalked by a group of girls a few weeks ago. I thought they were interested, but they just wanted test answers." Kai rolled his eyes. "I got used to it eventually, but I don't tutor." His eyes darkened. "You want to know the secret to getting good grades? It's called working. Your social life doesn't matter. Just lock yourself in your room and study hard." I leaned back in my chair, attempting to look casual. Kai and I weren't friends. We had never spoken in our collective 17 years of life, and yet I felt like I had to get close to him to save him from a horrific fate. Why would I need a tutor? If I kept him talking, I could keep an eye on him without it being weird. Judging from his expression, though, I had already made it weird. The boy looked amused, not annoyed. That was something. At least he wasn't telling me to fuck off. "You got the lowest grades last semester," he said. When I opened my mouth to ask how, he shrugged. "I peek at the teacher's notes sometimes." Kai stabbed a page in his book. "You're on thin ice, Cassie. They're about to call your parents." "Oh, that's..." I drew out a breath. "That's pretty bad." "Yeah, it's pretty bad." He shot me a smirk before jumping to his feet. "Like I said, just study. If you really want those grades, work for them." Kai sent me a sarcastic salute. "There, happy now. Now you don't need to follow me everywhere." Panic flooded me when he started to move towards the door, and I was automatically on his heels, trying to keep a good distance. When he pushed through the library doors, I followed, shouldering my backpack. "Where are you going?" "Home." Kai didn't turn around, quickening his stride. "I work better at home, and no offense, but you're kind of freaking me out. You've got crazy eyes, Cassie." Kai mind bugging his eyes out, laughing to himself. "What, do you see dead people?" Something like that. Looking around the corridor, I didn't see any smoke or shadows. Mr. Asher was nowhere to be found, and neither was his bad intention dripping from every crevice in the ceiling. Kai took the stairs 2 at a time, and I made an effort to keep his distance. Kai reached into his jacket and pulled out his earphones, corking them in. Still no Mr. Asher. Class was still in session, but I expected the teacher to make his move quickly. I had to make sure Kai got home safely. My brain was in overdrive as I ran after him. Eventually, it became too obvious. I was catching up to him, and the boy kept twisting around and shooting me warning glares, like he was seconds from calling the police. Kai crossed a main road quickly, ducking into an alleyway, and I aimed to follow him. I remember stepping forwards onto the road with full intention to run across it and after him. But at the corner of my eye, smoke was forming in the air, billowing, dancing, twirling under the late afternoon sun. It was coming from a truck driver, and it only took one look across the road at a woman pushing a stroller holding hands with a smiling little boy for me to know his bad intention. It wasn't quite inevitable yet, still gray, but it was there. It was at the back of his mind, already eating away at his thoughts. I found myself transfixed by the smoke, and I forgot to move, forgot to remember to get out of the road. I don't remember the car hitting me. It felt more like the world was exploding around me and I was the center of it. My head hit solid concrete. That, I know. Next thing I knew, I was in hospital surrounded by my parents and several nurses wearing wary smiles. According to them, I had mostly head trauma and a sprained ankle. I felt like shit, but I was already panicking about Kai. After downing half a glass of water, I asked my parents how long I had been asleep. only for them to tell me it had been 5 days. 5 fucking days since I'd been asleep. It was an induced coma, apparently, to make sure there was no internal bleeding. I tried to get out of bed, but my body was aching, my head swimming. Kai Oliver, I managed to hiss out when Mom insisted I got rest. Is he okay? Did anything bad things happen to him? Mom got a funny look on her face. She looked like she might reply before deciding against it. What is it? I whispered. She stood up. Nothing for you to worry about. Get some rest, okay? I'll be back tomorrow. When she left my room, I only had to turn my phone on to understand her paling cheeks. 3 students from my school had gone missing, including Kai. Smart students, I realized after looking through the names. Lily Hartley, Kane Jacobs, and Kai Oliver. I remembered seeing their names gilded in gold in the school's main reception. My mind whirred with questions. What would Mr. Asher want with smart students? I felt guilty for not seeing his bad intentions with Lily and Kane. After reading through a local article posted 2 days earlier, I felt sick. It hadn't been a week since their disappearance, and the police were already ruling it as kids skipping town. All of them were 18, but that didn't matter. It didn't make sense that there was barely a police investigation. When I felt well enough to stand without tipping over, I discharged myself from the hospital. Mr. Asher's house was easy to find with some Googling and a conversation with the school receptionist. He lived at the end of a cul-de-sac. His house was what you would expect a middle-aged man to own, a large Victorian building with modern touches to it, a skylight built into the roof, and a gate with a mechanical lock I found myself standing in front of. Before I could press the button, I smelled it again. Sour milk. The air around me blurred, and I glimpsed a shadow at the corner of my eye. I wouldn't go in there, kid. The shadow had a gruff voice. It sounded like an old man. When I turned to look, there was nothing there but the slightest outline indicating a human figure bleeding into late afternoon light. The figure smelled of bad intention, but his voice was strangely gentle. Every soul in that house is dead. I didn't move, didn't speak, though he must have known I wanted to know more. I was a detective in the late 90s. He murmured. A bunch of kids disappeared, 16 or 17-year-olds. I knew it was the teacher as soon as I was put on the case. His laugh was gravelly. That man was a fucking weirdo, but the kids loved him. Anyway, I tried to set up an investigation into him and was laughed at by the other guys. So I thought, fuck it, I'll do it myself. The man's breath was startlingly cold, prickling my neck. Worst thing I ever did. Cost the next thing I know, I'm being strung up and gutted like a fucking pig. He didn't say much to me, only that he was going to watch me bleed out slowly, so I'd feel everything. And I did. I felt him tugging out my insides like the bastard was enjoying it. Well, he most likely was. His words sent shivers down my spine, and I took a subconscious step back. I still don't know what is in that house to this day, the man sighed. I can't get in. I didn't write the Being Dead rulebook, so I have no idea why I can't enter my place of murder. I just remember the shit he told me while he was watching me spill my guts. He calls it his metal kingdom, or something like that. Whatever the fuck that means. He snorted. The man's a lunatic. I pray for those kids' souls, the ones he took in the 90 seconds, and now, whatever he does to them, I bet it's a fate worse than death. I caught what looked like a finger blurring into view. He pointed to a window on the top floor. I see him sometimes at night. It's usually when they've visited their parents. They're good company, but most of the time I can't bring myself to meet eyes with them. You know, I couldn't save them. Fuck, the 3 of them were right below me and I couldn't save them. He killed me before I could, and even then I didn't even make it to where they were. I was 2 steps into the kitchen before a lamp was slamming down on my head, and there I was, strung up in his piggy barn ready for the slaughter. I didn't realize I was speaking until I heard my own words hit the sound barrier. He's taken more of them. Yeah, older this time, around 5 days ago. He paused. I'm guessing these are friends of yours. I didn't answer, and he cleared his throat. You're going to completely ignore everything I'm telling you and get yourself killed too. Again, I didn't answer. I pushed the button and steeled myself. It's your funeral, the man grumbled. Just tell me what's in there, all right? I've been waiting for almost 30 years. I just want to answer one question. Why kids? Not just kids, I thought. Smart kids. Not to mention, another question driving me crazy. Why were the towns protecting him? The man, or at least the outline of him, faded, as well as the stink of sour milk. I was back in reality, standing in front of my psycho teacher's house after his victim just told me had murdered 3 teenagers in the 90 seconds and had kidnapped 3 of my classmates who were no doubt going to have the same fate. I wanted to turn and run, But before I could, the gate swung open. The speaker cracked, my teacher's voice coming through. Cassandra Samuels. Even his voice was tainted with the stink of rot and mold. What brings you here? This is quite the surprise. I was actually just about to attend a dinner date. I managed to find my voice. I need help, I said, panicking. With the crucible, I don't understand it. That is what the online whiteboard is for, Miss Samuels. Find all resources in the latest folder I uploaded. I don't have internet at my house. I lied. My power's gone off, and my parents are at work. He paused. I can spare some time to go over some of the points we went over in class. Why don't you come inside? Mr. Asher greeted me in the doorway. His bad intention was gone, which meant he'd either fought against it or given in. I already knew which one it was. The teacher led me inside his house. It was cozy with a lounge I peeked inside, and a kitchen which looked far too sterile. His laptop was set up on the dining room table, and he offered me a seat before pulling out his teacher's notes and a copy of The Crucible. We had gotten maybe 20 minutes into a lecture I wasn't even fully taking in, when the hairs on the back of my neck prickled. I had to get out of there and find out where he was keeping the other students. I figured using the bathroom excuse would work, though to surprise, he shook his head, shooting me a sly smile. No bathroom, I'm afraid. Both of them are currently out of use. Tapping my pen on my notepad, I was struggling to swallow my mediocre lunch. That's okay, I said and jumped to my feet. I should probably get going anyway. My mind was already working ahead of me. I counted my steps and then followed mine. Mr. Asher led me out into the hallway, and I passed an expensive-looking table laid with paperweights. I wondered if he'd used one of them to knock out Kai and the others, as well as the detective. Before I could hesitate, my hand was whipping out and snatching up a glass paperweight shaped like a heart. The teacher had his back to me. It was the perfect hit. I bet I was shadowed with bad intentions at that moment. But if it was to defend myself and find my kidnapped friends, did it really matter if my soul was blackened too? I didn't think so. I just swung the damn thing. Mr. Asher had twisted around to talk to me, and I had taken the chance and slammed the paperweight as hard as I could into the back of his skull. I expected it to be a knockout, like in the movies, but I was unaware real life was far different. My teacher didn't collapse to the ground, but he did stumble, howling in pain. He was caught off guard, so I struck again, which this time sent him tumbling to the floor. He was still breathing. Somehow, I took that as an opportunity to explore the mammoth of his house. I made sure to shut and lock the door in case someone came in, and I dragged my teacher's unconscious body in the downstairs bathroom, locking that too. You might think this was all meticulously planned, but I was just panicking. I checked the upstairs first. All of the bedrooms were empty. I knew they would be. I guess I was stalling. I really didn't want to check the basement, though when I was sure every room had been searched through, the only place left was down narrow concrete steps. The basement wasn't what I was expecting it to be. I thought I'd find some kind of torture chamber, or at least my friends tied up. That is what I thought my teacher was. I thought he was a psychotic kidnapper who was in pain. What I found, however, was a room which looked like it was made of metal. The walls were concrete, but everything else was glistening metal, which took my breath away. Dim lights shone down on three metallic structures, clumsily built, but well enough to look like a real craft of some sort. It was like something from a sci-fi movie. They were in three colors: pink, blue, and green. Humanoid structures towering over me. I blinked, tearing my gaze from whatever project my teacher had been working on in his spare time. Whatever I was looking at could wait. I had to find the others. I risked using my voice in a whisper, scanning the room. "Hello," I hissed. "Is anyone down here?" I nearly jumped out of my skin when the structure next to me, the blue one, flashed suddenly. It hummed like it was powering up. I triggered it somehow. Voice activation, maybe. I ignored it and kept searching. There were empty boxes at the back of the room, as well as a door which looked like it led into an old bathroom. I was twisting the handle when the humming grew louder, and I could have sworn it sounded like a groan mixed with a yawn. "Cassandra." The voice sent me twisting back around, my gaze going to the structure which was now powered on. Oh, thank God. Kai was talking, his cry filling up the room, but I couldn't see him anywhere. "You need to help us," he hissed. For some reason, I couldn't stop staring at the blue machine. It seemed to be flashing in sync with what he was saying. Mr. Asher went fucking crazy and knocked me out. I don't know what he's done to me, but I woke up here. I can't fucking move, man. I think he's drugged me or something. Kai, I cut him off. Suddenly, it was so hard to breathe. My body was paralyzed, and I could sense my hands slowly moving to cover my mouth. The metallic thing in front of me had stopped flashing. I took a slow step backwards. Where are you? What do you mean, where am I? I'm right in front of you. Are you blind? Cassie. My brain was suddenly in full control of my body. I took a step forwards, and then another and another until I was resting the palm of my hand on the thing's metallic shell, which hummed in response. Hey, no touchy. Get me out of here. God, man, he's done something fucked up to me. Does he have me tied down or something? I can't feel my legs or arms. I don't think words can describe what I felt at that moment. What I felt when I searched the room further, when I pulled open the mysterious door and found a toilet leaking bright red, and what my teacher had tried to stuff down it. I was screaming, and I couldn't stop myself. I didn't care that I could get caught, that I might freak Kai out. I couldn't fucking stop. My hands were over my ears and I was begging it to be a nightmare. It had to be, right? But Mr. Asher's words from class were haunting the back of my mind. And all it took was looking at the teacher's project to understand what the man had meant. What is the most important part of an aircraft? The pilot. Kai Oliver has answered. Would you ever pilot a plane, Kai? The teacher's voice rang in my head. Looking at the shiny metal structure in front of me, I came to the realization that Kai was the pilot. He was the pilot, I thought, thinking about what was stuffed down the toilet, what spattered the walls and floor. I only saw half a torso and slimy pink and red before I'd backed out of there and heaved up everything in my gut. I couldn't leave them. I didn't look at the metal thing with Kai's voice. I looked at the old wooden door hiding his remains, which our teacher had failed to hide. Kai, I spoke softly, gently, so he wouldn't freak out. I'm going to get all of you help. Okay, what? His tone grew frightened. No, Cassie, don't leave me here. I can't move. Tears filled my eyes. You're right, I said. Hey, I drugged you. You're in a bad state right now. My stomach lurched when his son rang out, tinged with something robotic, something humming on the edge. I think something bad has happened to me, he whispered. I can see you, but I can't see myself. Am I okay, Cassie? The majority of Kai Oliver was in the bathroom, while the rest of him towered over me. I took another step back, my breath thinning. You're fine, I bit out. I promise I'll get you guys out of here. The metal thing flashed. Okay, Kai sighed. Just hurry up, okay? I've got a test due on Monday, and fuck, I still need to finish my Yale application. He groaned, and the structure moved slightly, its twitching arm jolting. Man, I've got so much work to do. It sucks that asshole chose the busiest week of my life to decide to kidnap and keep me in his fucking basement. Kai was humming to himself when I left him. I left Mr. Asher and called the police, pushing past the detective who stepped in front of me. What's in there, kid? I didn't reply, focusing on what I was saying to the cops in hysterical shrieks which racked my chest. When I spoke to the lead officer, calmly trying to explain what I had seen, I knew someone would help them. Someone would get them out of there. I waited for the report. I waited for the cops to storm my teacher's house and pull out his filthy secret. Except that is not what happened. They stormed his house, but they only found him locked in the bathroom. According to them, there were no metal monsters in the basement, and I was arrested for attempted murder. It all makes a sick kind of sense. For reasons out of my knowledge, this fucking town is protecting my teacher, in the past and present. Mr. Asher dropped the charges when my mom begged him, but when they dared put me in front of him, I couldn't help myself. I screamed at him, over and over again. Why? I asked him, and I didn't stop screaming it at him until I was dragged out. It's been 3 months. I didn't bother with college. I'm still trying to get in that fucking house. I'm still waiting for his bad intention to show up. And when it does, I'll be ready. I'll show you the town, and this time they won't be able to cover it up. I will show them what my teacher did, and I'll get them out of there. Whatever is left of them, whatever is powering those things. I promise you, Kai, I will get you out. I found a creepy photo album that belongs to my wife, but she denies ever seeing it. My wife Isabel and I met because of a murder in our freshman year at college. Our dorm had been blocked by the cops because a girl we both knew had been found stabbed 42 times in her bed. The killer has taken her eyes, mouth, nose with him. The strangest thing was that not one person in that crowded dorm heard her scream. Isabel lived a few rooms down from the scene, and I saw her standing at the very center of the crowd, her arms wrapped around Christy, the victim's roommate, who was white with shock. They looked terrified and still in their pajamas, but Isabel turned and her blue eyes met mine. Something in her gaze was so sad and scared that I knew right then in that moment I needed to protect her. I went up to ask if I could help in any way, and ended up spending the day helping Isabel look after Christy. After that, we were pretty much inseparable. I was there for her when the police announced they were trying to search for the killer but had no leads. He struck again a few towns over, exactly the same mo, and then again a town over from there. The press began to call him the college butcher. Isabel spent more time at my room after that. She was majoring in literature, so I'd find notes strewn across the room about everything from Dante's Inferno to Austen's Pride and Prejudice. I didn't mind though. Isabel was beautiful, kind and funny, and someone who had lived a very normal life until that point, so I could understand the shock. She loved her parents, had 2 younger sisters, and the first time I met her parents for Christmas, I almost resented my own parents for not welcoming me nearly as warmly as they welcomed us into their home. It was perfect. Too perfect, and I should have been smarter, wiser, but I was young, stupid, and deeply in love. We got married a few years after college after I had got a job as a software developer, and she had got a job working as a teacher at the local high school. We bought a house in a quiet, safe neighborhood in a quiet, safe town, and for a while, everything seemed so good. For 10 whole years, everything has been good, until 3 weeks ago when I decided to clear out the attic because I could swear I heard something skittering up there when I was getting ready to leave in the morning. Thinking it was mice or rats, I told Isabel in the kitchen that night while she was adding the finishing touches to the bolognese and I was pouring us a couple of glasses of wine. "I think there's something in our attic," I said casually as I passed her the glass of wine. "I'm going to go give it a clear out and see if it's a rat or something." When she said nothing, I looked at her face. It was completely pale and she was staring at me with something I could not place in her eyes. It wasn't fear. It was something else. "Don't go up there. I'll deal with it." I frowned. "I really think it's something small and I've been wanting to clean up that place for a while. Let me deal with it." She stared at me then, and a sort of involuntary shudder went up my spine. "Jack, do not go up there. Promise me." I nodded slowly, confused. We respected and loved each other and I wouldn't want to hurt her in any way. And given how stressed she was, I knew I had to listen to her. But she may as well have dangled a chocolate chip cookie in front of my face and told me not to ever touch it. So I waited until she left for work one morning and went up there. The attic was dark, but we had a light in the middle of the room. Regardless, I had my phone's torch I could rely on. Since ours was an older house, we had actual stairs leading up to the attic as opposed to a ladder. And when I walked to the end of the hallway and opened the door that led to the attic, I swore I heard a creak at the top of the stairs, the kind of creak only a foot can make when it lands on a faulty floorboard. The hair at the back of my neck stood up as though a cold draft had blown into the hall. I squinted into the darkness at the top of the stairs and softly asked hello. As the moments passed, rationality caught up with me. How stupid was I to think there was something up there? Annoyed at myself, I climbed, grasped my phone and flicked the torch, and with more confidence than I truly possessed, I walked up the stairs, listening to each stair creak as I did. The attic was creepier than I remembered it. It was actually a space I had planned to convert into a game room of sorts, but Isabel had talked me out of it, and honestly, over the years I had forgotten how big it was. It was your average attic in many ways. Dusty, wooden floors, a small window at the end of the room overlooking the neighborhood, but it was spacious. Sure, it held all our old junk, but even so, the boxes and the couple of pieces of old furniture took up such little space at the far end of the room. I remember thinking how nice skylights would be in the sloping ceiling. Why had Isabel, who was so organized and wanted all the rooms in the house to be used, so keen to leave this as it was? A slight unease had started to make its way around the corners of my mind. As if on autopilot, I walked to the end of the attic where the 5 boxes which contained Isabel's things were lying. Part of me was screaming that this was a massive invasion of her privacy, but I didn't care by that point. I wanted to see what was in there that was making my wife act so strange about this particular room. I sat cross-legged on the dusty floor and pulled the first box to me. Opening it up, the first box was just some old clothes that she had kept for sentimental value. T-shirts signed by friends, a few old sweatshirts, nothing that really piqued my curiosity. The next box was just some old books which she didn't want to part with but for some reason wouldn't keep in the bookcases I had built for her in the living room. When I reached the third box, something in me hesitated. I think a part of me knew that my life was going to change after I opened this box. Some strange sixth sense. Carefully, I unsealed the box and looked inside, and a sigh of relief overcame me. It was just framed photographs and a photo album. I smiled and lifted the first one, Isabel and her sisters laughing as children at her 4th birthday. Some were of her parents and others of us. Then something struck me. Why hadn't she put these photos up downstairs? That weird chill was back. The box only held the large brown leather photo album now, and my heart racing, I opened it to its first page. It was a large black and white photo of a small girl on a swing facing away from the camera. That in itself was creepy, but the creepiest thing about the photo was another little girl in a white dress who was standing at the edge of the woods looking at the girl on the swing. It was almost as if she was looking at me through the photo. The next page had the same little girl on the swing playing in the jungle gym, smiling as she swung from the bars. Behind her, the strange little girl stood, watching her every move, her eyes cold, her mouth a thin line. Page after page of this little girl living her life, and the strange girl standing on the edges watching her. As the girl grew up, I recognized her to be Isabel, and the girl watching her looked like her, a darker, angrier version of her. I swallowed hard, watching my wife's doppelganger grow closer, seeing photos of her in my room with the shadow of herself watching her. My vision swam and I felt sick. Snapping the album shut, I wedged it under my arm and fled the attic, taking the stairs 2 steps at a time down from the attic. As I closed the door and leaned my head against it, I took a slow, shuddering breath. What the fuck was going on? That evening I waited for my wife to come home at the kitchen table, nursing my strongest whiskey in my hand as she walked in through the kitchen door. "Hi, hon," she greeted me with a kiss and dumping the shopping bags full of groceries on the table. "How was your day?" I paused and slowly cleared my throat. "I found it, Isabel." She was pulling the milk out and was about to turn to the fridge to stack it when I said this. She frowned, putting the milk down on the table. "What do you mean?" I quietly lifted the album off my lap and put it on the table. "This is why you didn't want me to go into the attic, right?" The words came out harsher than I intended them to. She looks at the album and her face turns pale as though she has seen a ghost. But when she looks at me, she says, "I've never seen that before in my life," and without another word walks out of the room. I chased after her. "Isabel, who is the girl in this? Look at me when I'm talking to you." I grasped her arm and turned her towards me. She slapped me hard across my face. My wife, who wouldn't even raise her voice at our cat when he scratched her, slapped me. I watched in open-mouthed shock as she stormed up the stairs into our bedroom and slammed the door. The album was still in my hand, the weight of it an omen. And that's when I heard it again, the skittering I had been hearing from the attic. Except now it sounded like it was coming from our bedroom. "What the fuck?" I muttered. That's when the scraping started. It sounded like someone was very slowly clawing at the floorboards above me. My heart began to race as I slowly looked at the darkness at the top of the stairs. Why hasn't she switched the lights on when she went up there? "Isabel," I called, my voice hoarse with fear. At first there was nothing, but then I heard it. "Isabella," a high-pitched voice mocked from the darkness. My blood ran cold. I was terrified, but the thought that my wife could be in danger was more overpowering, so I ran up the stairs to our bedroom door. I found it wide open with no trace of my wife inside. "Is Isabel?" I asked hesitantly as I looked around the empty bedroom. That's when I felt it. A cold hand grabbed my ankle from under the bed. I screamed and pulled myself out of its grasp, stumbling backwards until I fell against. "Isabel." She grabbed my hand and dragged me down the stairs. "I told you not to go into the attic." She sobbed as she dragged me to the front door. "Now you've let her out. You've let her into our lives." As we got outside, she rushed to the car. "Hurry up before she finds us." I jumped into the passenger seat without saying a word. "Isabel, what the hell is going on?" She started the car and we zipped out of the driveway. I could see her knuckles were white from gripping the steering wheel so hard. She finally spoke, her eyes focused on the road. "She's always been there, always angry. You see, I'm the one who got to live." "What?" I was more confused than ever. "I'm a twin, Jack," she said to me quietly. "I'm the twin that survived while she died in the womb." I looked at her confused. "So she's what?" "She's an evil spirit who wants a chance to live, and ever since I was born she has been eating away at my life." That album was a way to trap her. Those photos were like talismans. I used to keep her in there. Every single physical piece of evidence she exists. When we were in college and that awful thing happened, I went to a professional. She helped me trap her, and then I opened up the album and let her out. I said softly. She nodded, a resigned sigh escaping her lips. "She wants to be me, you understand? She won't stop until she has absorbed all of me." I was quiet. That's when I saw the movement in the mirror. Turning around, I saw the thing that wanted to be my wife sitting there, grinning at me. I yelled. Isabel slammed on the brakes. We didn't even see that truck coming. We didn't have a chance. When I woke up at the hospital later, a policeman was standing next to me looking grim. I clearly tried to get up, but my whole body felt like a bruise and I fell back onto the bed breathing hard. "Isabel," I whispered. Every part of my body hurt. "Where was my wife?" "Mr. Taylor," the policeman said, "I am sorry to inform you that your wife was killed in the accident." The news hit me like a punch in the face. "No," I strangled back a sob. No, sir, I am sorry for your loss, but you are going to need to answer some questions for us." The police officer pulled up a file and looked at me carefully. I nodded through the tears running down my face. "We would like to know why your DNA has showed up in a string of murder cases. Are you familiar with the case of the college butcher?" A few months ago, I discovered the perfect town of Avante. Now I wish I had never visited. I had fallen asleep on the train ride and only woke up because my head slid off the back of the seat and slammed against the window. I was jolted awake and rubbed my head for a few seconds before I opened my eyes and saw the sign outside. "You are now entering the town of Avante. We hope that all of your dreams come true." As I sat up and looked around the train car, I realized that I was alone. All of the other passengers seemed to have gotten off at their stops, wherever they had been. I wondered how long I had been asleep. We didn't seem to be moving anymore, and I stood up. Just then, the train attendant showed up. I flagged him down. He was a young man in his mid-20s, dressed in slacks and a button-up, with a red bow tie around his neck. "Hi, sorry, I think I fell asleep for a while. Did I miss the stop in Goldcrest?" I asked him. He glanced out the window. "It appears so. We're in Avante now. That's about an hour out of Goldcrest." I sighed. The sleepiness was starting to wear off and I was starting to realize how fucked I was. Not only had I missed my stop, but now I was going to miss my work meeting. "Well, is there a way I can get back to Goldcrest from here?" He thought for a second. "You could wait for the next train. It'll be here in about 20 minutes. I sat back down, annoyed. There was no way I wasn't going to get fired over this. At the very least, I would be demoted. "I would recommend taking a walk through Avante. It's really a lovely town," the train attendant pressed. I glanced back at the town behind me. It did look like a nice, peaceful place to be. Maybe he was right. Maybe a walk would calm me down. "I'll come get you before the next train leaves," he added. I nodded and picked up my bag, walking off the train. The weather in Avante was amazing, nothing compared to the chilly temperatures back home. I made my way through town. After a few minutes, I noticed that there didn't appear to be anyone else around town. I continued walking around for a few minutes before I turned around and made my way back to the train. "Back so soon?" asked the train attendant. I shrugged. "There's not much to do. Use your imagination," he replied. "What do you mean?" I asked, confused and slightly annoyed. "Isn't there anything you wish you could do? Surely there's something about your life that you would change." I thought about it for a second. "I guess so." "Well, try it out. Envision it in your mind. And then, well, you'll see." He grinned at me and waved me off. I hesitated for a second, but then made my way back into town. I walked until I found myself in a small suburban neighborhood. I stopped in front of the first house on the street and stared at it. It was what I would consider my dream home, a huge yard with a well-kept garden and a wooden porch. It had bay windows in the front of the house and a large front door with glass paneling. I thought back to what the attendant said and closed my eyes as I envisioned the one thing I would change about my life. Then I opened them and took a deep breath. I walked up the porch steps and put my hand on the doorknob, exhaling before I pushed the front door open. To my surprise, it opened and I walked into the house. I could hear the sound of children laughing upstairs. The house smelled like freshly baked bread and I set down my bag. I could hear footsteps coming toward me. The sound of heels tapped on the hardwood floors and I looked up to see Rosalia coming around the corner. "Babe, you're home." She smiled at me. I smiled back as she reached out to take my jacket off. She gave me a peck on the cheek and a hug. She smelled like roses. I inhaled as she backed away from me. She was dressed in a tight-fitting sweater and a skirt. Her nails and makeup were done, and her hair was soft and shiny, her soft curls falling down her shoulders and back. "How was work?" she asked. I followed her back into the kitchen, trailing behind her slowly. "It was fine," I replied awkwardly. I watched her as she bent over to take a loaf of bread out of the oven. I felt bad for staring and averted my eyes as I shifted awkwardly. "The boys are upstairs. I'm sure they'll be happy to see you," Rosalia said as she set the loaf of bread down on the counter. "I'll go say hi." I made my way upstairs and found the kids in the first bedroom to the left. They were playing with Legos and stopped when they saw me, running up to hug me. I crouched down so I could hug them both. "Daddy, you're home," they shouted. I pulled back so I could look at them. It was a bit weird to see them here. I knew they weren't really my kids, but they looked exactly like them. Finn had the same blonde curly hair, and Hudson had the same birthmark on his right cheek. The resemblance was uncanny, almost scary. "Do you want to play with us?" Finn asked. I stood up and stared down at my twin sons, who weren't really my sons. "Maybe later," I replied. I walked out of their room, closing the door behind me. As I turned around to head back downstairs, I ran into Rosalia. She grinned as she grabbed onto my tie, pulling me into her. She kissed me and I grimaced. Not because I didn't like it, I did, but I felt guilty. She pulled away from me and ran her hand down my chest. "We could sneak away into the bedroom right now, you know," she whispered. I forced a smile. "You can go ahead. I'll meet you there," I replied. She winked at me and headed towards the room at the end of the hall. I hurried back downstairs and headed out the front door after grabbing my bag and my jacket. I felt anxious, like my heart was going to fall out of my chest. What was I doing? How did that seem so real? And why did I like it? I really shouldn't have liked it. It was wrong, and I felt guilty. Here I was, imagining a life that didn't involve my wife, but rather some other woman who was taking her place. I hurried back towards the train as if Rosalia and my fake sons were going to come after me or something. As I approached the train, I saw the attendant heading my way. "I was just about to come get you," he called. "I'm here. Is the other train going to take long?" I asked. Right on cue, the next train pulled up, and the attendant pointed toward it. I waved and walked off towards the train. "Come back anytime," he called after me. "Avante will be here waiting for you." Walked into the house and heard the sound of my kids playing upstairs. However, the house didn't smell like freshly baked bread. Instead, it smelled like cheap candles and mac and cheese. I set my jacket and bag down by the door and made my way toward the kitchen. There were a couple of dairy dishes in the sink, and my wife Kira was cleaning up a spill on the counter. "Hey, you're home," she said. She stood up and washed her hands before walking over to me and giving me a kiss on the cheek. She smelled of cheap fabric softener. "How was work?" she asked. She walked over to the table and picked up some dishes, carrying them over to the sink. She was dressed in old slippers and sweats. Her hair was tied up at the top of her head. I thought back to my time in Avante and felt the guilt setting in again. "It was great," I lied. She smiled back at me. "Dinner's in the oven. It should be ready in like 10 minutes. "Sounds good," I replied. I walked upstairs and found the boys in their room watching a movie. "Hey, guys, what's going on up here?" I asked, looking around their room at the toys that were scattered about. "We're watching a movie. Do you want to watch?" Hudson asked. I nodded and joined them on the floor, sitting in between them. "So what did you guys do today?" I asked them. "We went to the park with Mommy and Rosa," Finn replied. I felt a pit forming in my stomach at the sound of her name. "That sounds fun," I responded. "Yeah, Rosa bought us ice cream," Hudson said. "Well, that's nice of her." Downstairs, Kira shouted that dinner was ready. I didn't talk much through dinner, and after I finished doing the dishes, I made my way back upstairs and into our bedroom where Kira was coming out of the shower. I passed her in her towel and headed into the shower myself and then joined Kira in bed. She rolled over to face me, leaning forward to kiss me. I kissed her back enthusiastically, and I felt bad. Our relationship had been a little rocky for the past year or so. She was always so busy with the kids, and I was always so busy with work, and I supposed we were struggling to find time for each other. We had hit a bump in the road and we both knew it, although neither of us did anything to fix it. She looked at me and I could see the sadness in her eyes. "Good night," she whispered before she rolled over. I closed my eyes and dreamt of Avante. I would see Rosalia every morning as she walked out of her house across the street and jogged up and down the road. I developed a crush on her that only grew the more I thought about her, and the more I saw her. I went back to Avante almost every day after that. I was supposed to be at work, but that wasn't important anymore. I would take the train and ride until it stopped in Avante. The same attendant was always there, smiling at me, knowingly. The guilt was easy to ignore after a while. My life in Avante only got better. I had a hotter, younger wife who was always dressed up with her hair perfectly done. And I had my sons. I had the home of my dreams, and I suppose the life that I had always dreamed of. I spent hours with Rosalia in Avante. She was fun and romantic and exciting. I hated leaving Avante and going back to Kira every day. I was starting to hate her, and then I brought her to Avante. I didn't know what to do with her at first, But then I found a role for her. She was the neighbor across the street who was obsessed with me. She would try to seduce me every day when I got to my home in Avante, and also when I left. It helped me to stop hating her. In fact, I think I started to like her even more. At least one version of her was trying, even if it wasn't real. As my time in Avante continued, I started to notice things that were changing in my real life. Kira seemed to become more forgetful, and I'd sometimes find her staring at the running water as she stood outside the shower, like she had forgotten what it was for. Another time I found her staring at a pot of boiling water as if she were looking for something. She didn't react until I shook her a few times, and even then, she acted as if nothing had happened. I also noticed that my sons had gotten quieter. They were once loud and playful boys, and now they would sit in their rooms and stare at each other. One day as I was leaving to catch my daily train to Avante, I saw Rosalia standing in the middle of the road as she jogged in place. She seemed confused and stared off into the distance, her eyebrows pressed together. I approached her and called her name a few times before she snapped out of it. She looked at me as if she had no idea who I was before she continued on her run. I felt like I had caused this. My time away had destroyed my family. Did they somehow know what I was up to? Did Rosalia somehow find out about my fantasies? Despite all of these things, I couldn't help myself. I had to visit Avante. It had become an escape from my real life, which was slowly falling apart in front of my eyes. I had been visiting Avante for about a month before things went wrong. I was laying in bed with Rosalia. She had climbed on top of me and we were kissing as I ran my hands through her hair. Suddenly, she stopped and pushed herself off of me. I looked up at her and she stared down at my face. I watched her as she looked at me. I watched as her eyebrows pushed together and her eyes welled up with tears. "Are you okay?" I asked her. Tears started to spill down her cheeks and off her chin, falling onto my bare chest. "Why are you keeping me here?" she whispered. Her face had changed from sad to frightened and her lower lip quivered. "What?" I asked, sitting up and moving her off of me. She sniffled. "I don't want to be here. I want my life back." "Why are you keeping me here?" she sobbed. I tried to comfort her as she grew more distressed, sobbing louder and louder until she was shaking and shouting as she tried to take deep breaths. "Babe, what's wrong? Talk to me," I asked. She got up and backed away from me, grabbing the sheet to cover herself up. "I don't want to be here. I'm not your wife. Let me go," she shouted, falling to her knees as she kept crying. I don't know what you're talking about," I said as I got dressed. She took deep breaths and sat hunched over with her head in her hands as her shoulders shook. "Rosalia, are you okay?" I asked, slowly approaching her. She stood up and then lifted her head to look at me. Her face was red and wet from her tears. "What would you like for breakfast today?" she asked in a suddenly cheery voice. She smiled at me, but her eyes were empty and dead. "What?" I asked. "I can make you some waffles, or maybe an omelet." I stared at her and she started to get dressed. "I'll be down in a moment," she said. I walked out of the room, confused and scared. What had just happened? I made my way into Finn and Hudson's room. They were sitting in front of the TV watching a kid's show. I approached them. "Hey guys," I said. They turned to me and smiled. "How are you guys doing?" I asked. "We're okay, Daddy," Finn replied. "But we miss home," Hudson added. I froze. "What do you mean? You're home. We want Mommy back," Hudson said. I stared at them. "I miss Mom. Rosa is nice, but I like Mommy better," Finn muttered. I backed out of the room as she went back to their show. They had the same look in their eyes as Rosalia, dead, emotionless. I walked downstairs and opened the front door to see Kira standing on the porch. "Hey," I said as I tried to walk past her. "Are you happier here?" she asked. "What? Are you happier? Is she better than I am? Do you like it this way?" she asked. Her tone wasn't accusatory, but rather sad and disappointed. I said nothing. "Why did you bring me here? To chase after you? Why did you take my kids?" she asked. Her voice broke like she was about to cry. I moved to the side and slid past her, making my way down the steps. "Do you like it better here, Duncan?" she called after me. I turned to look back at her and saw Rosa and the twins step out of the house. "Are you leaving?" Rosa asked. "Don't leave us here, Daddy," the boys called. I kept walking. "You are such a fucking coward, Duncan. You can't just leave us here," Kira shouted. I ran all the way to the train and took deep breaths to calm myself on the ride back. Then I ran to my car and sped home, trying to shake off the events I had witnessed in Avante. When I pulled into my driveway, I didn't even bother turning the car off. I just wanted to see my kids and my wife, my real kids and my real wife. I unlocked the door and ran into the kitchen first. but no one was in there. I checked the living room next, and then the upstairs bedrooms. The house is empty. I could feel my hands start to sweat and my heart begin to race. I ran back outside and looked around, thinking maybe Kira had taken the kids on a walk or something, but she was nowhere to be seen. I ran across the street and banged on Rosalia's door, praying that I was wrong. When I heard the door opening, I sighed in relief. I looked up to see Whitney, her housemate, standing in the doorway. "Yes," she asked. "Is Rosalia home?" I asked her. She shook her head. "I actually haven't seen her since this morning. I don't know where she went. Her car is here, and so is all her stuff." I was about to call the cops, but I thought she was back. "But it's just you." My heart sank. "Thanks," I mumbled. Whitney shut the door and I walked back to my empty house. I couldn't make myself go inside, and I knew that Whitney wasn't going to find Rosalia again. I knew I wasn't going to see Kira or my sons again. I couldn't face them after what I had done. I still think about them sometimes, but I haven't gone back to the town of Avante. I don't think I ever will. I really think he wanted to hurt me. In my late teens and early 22nd, I was friends with a girl named Lucy. She was a very lonely kind of girl whose parents were, well, honestly, really shitty parents. Her mother was verbally abusive and her father really couldn't care less about anything. Because of the lack of love in her life, Lucy searched through dating sites for love and comfort from strange men, and she was not afraid of meeting them face to face even if they'd been chatting for only a few days. My friendship with Lucy was a strange one. I found her quite annoying sometimes, but I also felt awful for her because of her loneliness and lack of friends and love in her life. Sometimes I really didn't want to hang out with her, and some days I would accept her offer to hang out. When it was just her and I together, she was normal and okay to be around, but also very appreciative of having someone giving her attention. We had a small group of friends and she would try to get all of us together as often as possible, and honestly, the whole group together was really quite fun. When we were all together, Lucy was very hyper and you could just tell that she was happy to be around people who didn't insult her as her mother does. Suddenly, Lucy tells us she has a boyfriend. We were all surprised because we knew she met a lot of guys online, but we had never heard her say she was dating someone. A few days later, she sets up a day for our friend group to meet Trevor. None of us were looking forward to it because we thought he was going to be like all the others, a temporary boy toy. When we met him, we all felt awkward. He barely spoke a word. He wouldn't look directly at any of us at all. Lucy would try to be funny, but he would just give her dirty looks. Needless to say, we thought he was a weird one and could tell he didn't care much for her. As the days went on, Lucy kept telling me how much Trevor did not like me. This was weird because no one ever disliked me. I am always polite, respectful, and I smile a lot at everyone. But for some reason, he did not like me. She kept saying he thinks I am using Lucy for her money. Not sure how he thought that since I paid for everything for Lucy. To keep this piece of the story short, I think he was trying to find reasons to convince her to get rid of me. I got a terrible vibe from Trevor. He dressed like he didn't care about life. He never smiled. He didn't shake our hands when first meeting us. He stank of weed and really had an overall uncomfortable feeling about him. After months of Trevor trying to convince Lucy that I am a terrible friend and she should not hang out with me anymore, she started to do as he said. She would start to hide me from him. If she and I were together and he would call her on her phone, she would lie and say I wasn't there. If she was with a group of friends, he would have her swear I wasn't there. When he was going to be joining the group on an outing or just hanging out at her place, she would tell me I couldn't come. Lucy will do whatever a boyfriend says just to keep pleasing him so she doesn't lose them. Now here's where it gets scary. Lucy calls me one day and says she wants me to come hang out at her place. I agreed. She came to pick me up. We went to her house and watched TV for a bit. We then decided since it's a nice day outside, we would take her two dogs for a walk to a nearby pocket park and would later return to the house to have lunch together. While at this park, she receives a phone call. Now, let me say that Lucy is not a private person whatsoever and has never, ever walked away to answer a phone call until this day. She walked far enough away that she knew I would not be able to hear anything she said. This was suspicious to me, but not enough to question it. The call ends and she begins walking toward me with a look on her face as if she is trying not to smile. She tells me, "So, I need to bring you home now." I was slightly confused as we had only been together for about an hour, when we usually spend the entire day together, and she would never want me to go home. She would even frequently beg me to sleep over to avoid being alone. So anyway, I said okay and we walked to drop off her dogs at home, and we got into her car and off we went. About 10 minutes into the car ride, I realized she wasn't going in the direction of my house, so I questioned her. "Where are we going?" She smirked but didn't respond. I asked again, laughing uncomfortably. "Seriously, where are we going?" She continued to smirk but didn't want to answer me. I started to realize she was heading in the direction of where her boyfriend lived. "Oh hell no," I asked one last time with anger in my voice. "Where are you taking me?" Her only response was bone-chilling to me. "Trevor wants to talk to you." "Nope, nope. I wasn't having any of this." I insisted and demanded she let me out of the car, but with her evil smirk and same response. She said it again, "It's okay. He just wants to talk to you." I was furious at this point because this creepy guy who looks like he wants to kill someone, who also despised me, wanted to talk to me. Why can't he talk to me on the phone? Why do I need to go to his sketchy apartment? She absolutely refused to let me out of the car. She had the doors locked, as if I wasn't able to unlock my passenger door. I waited until she reached a red light. I grabbed her wallet from the back seat and took out her bus pass and bolted out of the car. I had no idea where I was or where the nearest bus stop was, but I was not about to let her crazy-ass boyfriend do whatever he wanted to me. She yelled for me to get back into the car, but of course, I ignored her. She sped off furiously. I immediately blocked her number on my phone. I removed her as my friend on social media and immediately warned the group of friends not to talk to her because she has gone nuts. I have not spoken to her since that very day, and she also lost the other 5 friends of the group as well. After this situation, Lucy, I hope you're truly lonely now. I learned the hard way why you should never agree to come into work on your days off. My boss asked if I'd be able to come in over the weekend and work on a project with another coworker. He said we'd be the only 2 in the building and would have free reign of the facility and its equipment. While I've always told myself I'd never come in on a weekend, I did like the prospect of having access to a few of the machines, something I'd normally have to sign up for, sometimes weeks in advance. The relative vacancy of the building was an added bonus as well, with normal operating hours having anywhere between 30 and 40 people on a single floor. Ultimately, I agreed and came in early Friday morning to see with whom I'd be working. It was a person I hadn't seen before, though I wasn't really startled by that, since I'd rarely made any effort to really grow acquainted with anyone. The nature of my job was research, and my work didn't require me to work with more than 2 or 3 people, let alone befriend anyone. So I greeted him, discussed the division of tasks, and got to work. Halfway through the day, he came over to my desk and asked if I had any interest in history, specifically in regards to the burial practices of ancient civilizations and the kinds of things with which they'd often bury themselves. I was a little taken aback by the question, mostly because I hadn't been asked something so casually personal in all my time working there. But figuring that it'd be best to keep up a polite rapport with him, I said sure, and he then asked if I'd like to see his gallery of such items at the end of our shift. I'm not exactly sure why I said yes, but I did. At the end of the day, we checked out and I followed him to his house. He led me to his basement, which ordinarily would have been a huge red flag, but my professional familiarity with him and the aesthetic homeliness of the house dissuaded any feelings of unease I might have had. The stairs leading down to it were carpeted, and there were cutely ensconced lights affixed to the walls as intervals. The basement itself was completely furnished, having the general appearance of a man cave, not exactly the decor of a deranged murderer's basement. He told me to wait on a leather couch in the center of the room and went off around the corner to retrieve something. I sat down and admired the room, taking particular notice of the seemingly ancient artifacts and relics displayed throughout, some of which I recognized as being Egyptian, while others were wholly beyond my limited historical knowledge. They all seemed to be concerned with, modeled after, or based on something pertaining to death, sculptures and casts of death's heads, figures of people in various states and throes of agony, death, or inhumation. It would have been a really macabre scene had the lighting not been so expertly handled to display everything in a museum-like way. Some even had little placards inscribed with trivia beneath them. These morbid objects were plainly the property of a true collector, not some weirdo hoarding mortuary trinkets. He returned a few moments later, carrying something wrapped in a beige tarp. Silently, he set it down on the table before the couch and stepped away, beckoning for me to unveil it myself. Playing along, sensing nothing in the way of foul play, I leaned forward and began unwinding the tarp. There wasn't a smell. At first, the tarp had efficiently contained that, but upon removing the final layer, a powerful stench hit me, and for a moment I couldn't even see the sheer acrid foulness of it stinging and watering my eyes. He apologized, said that he'd forgotten to warn me, given how he'd grown accustomed to it himself. Even as I blinked away tears, I mumbled that it was fine and did my best to regain my composure. Turning back to the object, I found myself feeling an even deeper revulsion from the sight of the thing than its smell had caused. It looked vaguely like a hive, only made of flesh. The material of which it was composed was plainly soft tissue of some kind, extremely porous and tensile. It was a bit larger than a football and about twice as thick. The base was fat, and the flesh-like substance seemed to collapse and congeal here, whereas it tapered off to a weirdly sharp point at the top. The whole thing was a dark pink, not yet red, but verging on it. It was so abjectly disgusting, and I made no attempt to hide how much it repulsed me. It's curious, isn't it? The shape, structure, even the color, my most intriguing find yet. Would you like to touch it? The question was like a smack to the face. I would have more readily agreed to kiss any of the skulls on showcase throughout the room than lay a single finger on that abhorrent chunk of whatever. I told him as much, though with a little more tact, considering how he plainly valued the bizarre thing. I didn't want to upset him, had no reason yet to suspect any ill-spirited intentions. He shrugged and then knelt beside the table, bringing his face level with what I'll from now on call the flesh hive. Gripping it with both hands, he brought his forehead against the surface and started humming. The tune wasn't one I recognized, but it seemed like a very sad, depressing song, like a funeral dirge. I'd given him the benefit of the doubt beforehand, but now, seeing him humming to this horrid little chunk, I decided that he was probably a little off his rocker in one way or another, thinking that I should probably head out before something even weirder and possibly harmful happened. I politely excused myself, saying that I had something to take care of at home. I half expected him to scream out or try to grab me or do something crazy, but he merely threw a dismissing flutter of the hand in my direction and continued on with his strangely sensual caressing of the flesh hive. Still a little on edge, I took the steps two at a time and tiptoe ran to the front door. I made it home fine. The next day at work I saw him sitting in the break room, only this time he looked distressed, nerve-wracked, as if he hadn't gotten a wink of sleep. Against my better judgment, I went over to his table and asked what was wrong, and he initially didn't seem to recognize me. Only when I said, "Did something happen after I left?" did he realize who I was and come to his senses a little, in a frantic, barely cognizable way. He then explained that his hibernaculum had prematurely opened, and that the things that had dwelt therein were now loose, assuming that I'd been right and that the thing was some sort of hive. I asked him where his pets had gone, thinking this to be the cause of his distress. I remembered how utterly distraught and panicked I'd been as a kid when my dog had gone missing for a whole day, and sympathized with his plight. But in an unforeseen turn of events, his response was, "They're not my pets. Their owner has been dead for centuries, if not longer, and they haven't gone missing. They're loose within me." And like a trigger, my brain finally allowed my eyes to relay what they had been seeing the whole time. In the span of a blink, the man's true, loathsome appearance was revealed to me. His once normal, healthy-looking skin was now pallid and splotchy, sickeningly vascular in some areas and wrinkly in others. His clothes were damp, as if he'd been sweating profusely for hours. His hair, well, he didn't have any. It was simply gone. My mind had simply projected the sight of his former hairstyle onto him in some manner of psychological cope. He looked deathly ill, and in a final, disgusting revelatory moment, my nostrils were invaded by the most noxious stench I'd ever smelled. It was like a cauldron of boiling innards, spiced with the offal of beasts. He absolutely reeked. I reeled away from the man, who rose to follow me as if fearing to lose the one person whom he thought could help him. I was shocked, so utterly disgusted that I didn't think to do the one logical thing, leave the break room. Instead, I backed myself into a corner, my mind unable to reconcile the man's warped, molting appearance with the normal environment of the break room. In his attempt to grab a hold of me, he'd fallen from his chair, and rather than get up and walk, he instead began crawling on his hands and knees in my direction, and as he crawled, he left a trail of slime in his wake, a sort of yellowish secretion too thick to be urine, too abundant to be sweat, and with each clumsy movement he let out a raspy gasp or a stertorous moan, the kind of sounds you might hear from a breathless corpse coming back to life. The horror of it simply became too much, and finally, just before he could reach me, I regained some of my senses and pushed away from the corner. One of his slime-slick fingers grazed my ankle at the last moment, and I'll never forget that horrendous feeling for as long as I live. I managed to leave the break room having suffered only that minor physical interaction and quickly went to my desk to gather my things. Knowing I'd have to pass by the break room again on my way out, I bought a pair of scissors with me, telling myself there'd be nothing wrong with using them for self-defense. Steeling myself for the journey back, I gripped the scissors in my right hand, set off toward the exit. All of the doors in the office have a vertical rectangular window through which you can peer in. I was delighted to see that the break room door was still closed, but something told me to peek through the window to see if the man had succumbed to his nightmarish illness or escaped to somewhere else in the building. I wish I hadn't looked inside. I could have just continued on and kept my sanity, but my curiosity got the better of me, and I stopped to gaze through that rectangular window, and I saw something so beyond the scope of normalcy, so biologically egregious, that I still question whether or not nature should be regarded as something worth protecting and revering, or destroying. I say this because on all accounts, the transformation the man had undergone in my brief absence was, tragically, a natural one within the context of his infestation. The things that had broken free from the hibernaculum and come to reside within his body were undergoing a perfectly natural process of adaptation and emergence, however inimical to the host itself. And the host, my coworker, the most recognizable part of him, the part that hadn't been completely repurposed, was his head, and it dangled from the ceiling on a tendril of some kind. The head had been sapped almost completely of its moisture and muscle, the face shrunken and ghoulish, the sockets practically hollow, the eyes barely visible within those dark pits. The mouth hung agape a little, but there was movement in the lips, and I thanked the barrier of the door for preventing me from hearing whatever unwholesome sound he might have been making. The rest of him had been divided, stretched out, reconfigured to suit some unimaginable design plan. Parts of him were plastered against the walls, while others stood erect from the floor, enrooted there by a network of tubes, tendrils, and what couldn't have been vines, but appeared so. Entire swaths of skin were stretched between counters and tables, or drawn tautly over chairs. Organs pulsed rhythmically, attuned to a life force wholly separate from that of their original owner. The sheer amount of mass present within the room was irreconcilable with how much of him there had been before, and I can only attribute it to some kind of spontaneous generation from within, the work of the age-old vermin that had taken residence within his flesh. I never saw them, not in any definite way. The titanic horror of that briefly glimpsed scene didn't allow me to really focus on each and every specific detail. I might have spotted a flourishing bouquet of flesh, beneath which could have been the nascent body of a burgeoning insect, or maybe a vaguely crustacean form, but far too big to be any crab or lobster, nestled within a wall-mounted ribcage. There could have been hairy, worm-like projections emerging from amidst a garden of steaming viscera, but the images, when they can be recalled, are fleeting, and the last thing I want to do is give them greater clarity within my mind. I only want to relate what I can, what is absolutely necessary, and then forget. As you can imagine, I didn't dawdle. I fled from that building, not bothering to clock out, forgetting that I'd technically stolen company-owned scissors. I left him there, to suffer, to be the incubator and birthing vessel for some new or long-forgotten order of parasite. I don't feel guilty about it. There's nothing I could have done. If you'd been in my place, you would have done the same, I'm sure. He was simply too far gone for human help. Even if he was still alive, that life was no longer human. Unsurprisingly, the business contacted me a few days later offering a nice severance package. I accepted it, of course. Included was a multi-paged NDA, though it strangely only pertained to the work itself, not the incident with my coworker. So, I haven't violated the terms of that agreement in telling you what happened. But in the event that I have somehow said too much, I only ask that you be mindful of the things you deal with. If you're a collector of antiquities, or happen to find yourself in the presence of ancient, newly unburied things, make sure the things you plunder from the dead, legally or otherwise, are as dead as their mummified owners. That is not dead which can eternal lie, and all that. I lived on an abandoned oil rig until people started to vanish. The rig was an oasis for the homeless. 2 miles off of the Texas coast, it was an abandoned oil rig turned into a shelter for the homeless. It was against the law, but the authorities never seemed to pay us any mind. Out of sight, out of mind. Isn't that the general position most places take on the homeless? I'm not sure how long the rig had been going before I ended up there, but when I arrived, it was like a full-fledged town on the water. A few people ran boats back and forth to the mainland. Some of the long-term residents operated like a city council. There were shops, a clinic, and a gas-powered generator to charge cell phones. A few local charities and food pantries would bring fresh water and dry goods a few times a month. Everyone got a bit for themselves, but the bulk was saved for those who couldn't go to the mainland for day labor. The most impressive feat was the garden. Over countless years, people had hauled dirt a few buckets at a time until there were dozens of planting beds on the old helicopter pad. No one officially oversaw it, but an older lady named Greta prided herself with constant care and tending. I lived there for 7 years. After losing all of my worldly possessions, the rig was the first place I ever felt at home. Shuffling from the alleyways to the shelter and back to the alleyways had worn me down. I had almost given up when Freddie told me about the rig. "I'm heading for the coast, Tim," Freddie told me one day. He was a decade older than me and a good friend. I wouldn't have gotten through my first few years on the streets if it weren't for him. Got an old friend who says there's plenty of space out on an old oil rig. A fella at the coast will take me out to it for a few bucks. You ought to come. An oil rig? I asked in disbelief. Why the hell do you want to go live on an abandoned oil rig? Sounds too risky. Freddie laughed and swatted me on the back. It's like a floating city. No cops to mess with you. No business owners are chasing you away from their shops. Just a bunch of people like us that came together to prop each other up. What have you got to lose? A convenience store canned you and sleeping on the streets has lost its luster. 2 days later, we hitched a ride to the coast. Freddie and I were blown away after we arrived. When he told me about the rig, I had imagined a filthy squat pad filled with trash and waste. It was quite the opposite. Aside from the rust of the aging structure, the rig was kept immaculately clean. No one slept in the open. Every available inch of indoor space was dedicated to sleeping space and food storage. A kind woman named Janet gave us both sleeping bags and blankets upon our arrival and took us to an old boiler room where there was available space to sleep at night. She told us we could leave our belongings in the boiler room, but Freddie and I were apprehensive. "Don't want anyone stealing my stuff," Freddie said curtly. "Leaving stuff sitting around is a good way to get fleeced. You'll find the community here quite respectful of everyone's property," she said. Janet reached into her back pocket and pulled out 2 yellow sheets of paper filled with handwriting and gave them to both of us. "Those are the rules here on the rig. We have a 3-strike policy here. If you break the rules 3 times, you're banished permanently." We both began to read this list of rules. Rule 1, no theft of any kind. Failure to repay debts is considered theft. Rule 2, no fighting. Rule 3, no drug use. Rule 4, drinking is allowed in moderation. Rule 5, if you don't contribute food or goods to the community, you must work daily to maintain the rig. Rule 6, do not enter the mechanical room below the drill module. Seems reasonable enough, I said and extended the list back to Janet, who decides if the rules have been broken. "You can keep it," she replied. "We have an informal council that meets every Saturday night in the mess hall. It's made up of our oldest residents. They will hear complaints and decide if a rule has been broken. If the incident is serious, the council will get together that day." We thanked her and headed to settle in. Over the next few years, Freddie and I integrated nicely into the community on the rig. The population remained roughly the same. New people would arrive occasionally. Old-timers would move on from time to time. Freddie and I spent most of our time on the rig. Before he lost his job and home, Freddie had worked in construction and welding. The council was excited to find out about his experience and asked if he would be interested in helping maintain the facilities. He agreed but asked that I be allowed to assist him. It was a comfortable life. The uncomfortable part came when we saw our first banishment. During a Saturday meeting with the council, a man was brought forward to answer for a rule infraction. His third. He was an older man with a long beard and a thin frame. His eyes were red with tears as he stood before the group. "My name is Albert Martin," he said with a shaking voice. "I have been accused of stealing 3 cans of soup from a neighbor. Someone found the emptied cans under my cot. I was framed. Someone knew I'd been in trouble 2 times already and pinned this on me. Have mercy. I have nowhere to go." The crowd murmured with discussion as the old man wept. Freddie and I could hear the conflicting opinions amongst the community. Some thought there wasn't enough evidence, while others said Albert was a known rule breaker and was likely guilty. Albert Martin, one of the councilmen, said, "This is your 3rd infraction and we cannot tolerate theft on the rig. Many here rely on the food donations we receive. You are banished and will not return here." "No," Albert shouted. He pulled out a rusted blade with a cloth-wrapped handle and held it toward the council. "I don't have anywhere to go. I didn't steal the damn food. It's a setup. While the man waved the knife at the group in front of him, Freddy tapped me on the shoulder and beckoned me to follow him. He crept silently up the aisle behind the man. Moving surprisingly quick for his age, he darted forward and wrapped his arm around Albert's neck. "Get the knife," Freddy shouted to me, and I pried the blade from the old man's hand. "Take him to the mechanical room downstairs," demanded a woman from the council. "We will hold him there until he can be taken back to shore." Freddy and I carried the thrashing man out of the mess hall and down the stairs toward the mechanical room. A man trailed behind us and pulled a key from his pocket and unlocked the door. We tossed him inside and slammed the hatch shut, and the man locked it. "You've killed me, you bastards," Albert shouted from inside the room. He hammered on the door and threw his weight against the thick metal. "You'll hear me. You've killed me. They aren't taking me to the shore. Those damn things are gonna kill me." Freddy and I turned to leave, but the old man's wails of fear and agony resonated in my mind. What things was he talking about? I would find out years later when Freddy was found guilty of his third violation and ended up in the mechanical room. Freddy was a hard worker and well loved in the community, but in his later years, he became overly fond of alcohol. He managed to keep it to himself for a while, but over time he grew angrier. When he was drunk, that's when the trouble began. His first violation was a simple fist fight. Freddy sat on his cot, drinking hooch and talking loudly to anyone who would listen. The man who slept in the far corner from us asked him to quiet down so he could sleep. Without warning, Freddy punched the man and told him to shut up. The second violation came when Freddy drunkenly rifled through another man's gear looking for cigarettes. He found half a pack of crumpled Marlboros and was closing the bag when the man entered. Freddy returned them, but the damage was done. His final violation came when a woman and her husband asked Freddy to fix a leak in one of the bunkhouses. He insisted it was already repaired, but they told him the leak had continued. Feeling insulted, Freddy shoved the husband and told him to piss off. When the man begged him to come to look at the leak, Freddy punched him. With that, the council decided his fate and had two men haul him off to the mechanical room to wait for a departing boat. That night when I returned to my cot, I saw all of Freddy's belongings sitting on his bed. I began to bag them up to take down to the mechanical room for his ride back to shore. After gathering them up, I headed to the stairs into the lower level of the rig. When I arrived on the lower level, there was a man from the council, Carl, standing guard beside the door to the mechanical room. Freddy was banging on the door and begging the man to let him out. He stood stone-faced, staring in my direction. "Tim, stop," the man said to me. "Freddy has already been judged. We're just waiting on a boat." "I know," I said, gesturing toward the backpack full of my friend's belongings. "Just wanted to drop his stuff off so he can take it back with him. I don't want him to leave with nothing." "Just drop it there," Carl said flatly. "I'll make sure he gets it before." Suddenly the air was filled with agonized screams. You could always hear muffled yelling on the upper levels when someone was locked up awaiting their banishment, but the thick floor piping always made it inaudible. Up close, I could hear the fear in my friend's voice. "What the hell is that?" Freddy shouted. "Let me out of here. It's going to kill me. Open the damn door." "You need to leave," Carl said, pointing toward the stairs. "Something is in there with him." I shouted. "Let him out. This is how it works, Tim," he spat. "If you don't want to join him, you'd better go." I could see the keys to the room hanging from a ring on his belt. I'm not sure what came over me, but I threw the backpack at Carl's head and lunged forward for the keys. He was momentarily shocked, but quickly regained his composure and began to struggle, landing 2 punches to the side of his head. He slid limply to the floor. I pulled the keys from his belt and unlocked the door. As the door creaked open, I began to call for Freddy, but the words died in my throat. Standing above my friend was a gangly creature covered in wet, scaly skin. Gill slits opened and closed on its neck, and purple eyes gazed at me from its bulbous head. As I made eye contact with it, the thing opened its massive jaws and hissed before grabbing Freddy's limp frame by the head. It turned toward an opening by the drill shaft and began to drag Freddy toward it. A crimson streak trailed behind them. Freddy's eyes were barely open as he lifted his hand toward me in a gesture for help. The creature's hand turned and a dry snap echoed in the mechanical room before it threw Freddy's lifeless body through the hole. A clawed hand reached toward me, mimicking the same gesture as Freddy. The thing opened its mouth again and uttered what I can only describe as a hellish laugh. Finished with its taunt, it stepped back and fell through the hole and into the rolling waves below. I left that same night and got as far from the coast as I could. After a few days in a Houston shelter, I left the state. I live in Omaha now. Farmhand work is plentiful, and I managed to get a cracker box apartment. The green pastures make me feel safe, but when I try to sleep at night, the roar of the ocean still echoes in my mind. I never told anyone what I saw. The authorities wouldn't believe me. Hell, maybe they knew. No one is worried about the homeless. Out of sight, out of mind, right? A glimpse of hell. So my story began on a typical Sunday. I was with my friends, hiking up a small mountain near my hometown in Norway. I was the first to reach the top, and as I looked out at the view, I slipped and fell. I hit my head on a rock as I fell and everything went black. The next thing I remember is opening my eyes and seeing a bright light. I felt weightless and at peace. Then, as suddenly as the light appeared, it was gone and I was falling into darkness. I felt like I was falling for hours, but it could have just been seconds. I eventually hit the ground with a thud and looked around. I was in a dark place lit only by a few torches. I could see people walking around in the distance, but they were too far away to make out any details. I started walking towards them, but no matter how far I walked, they always seemed to stay the same distance away. After a while, I started to hear screams. They were coming from all around me, and they sounded like they were in pain. I covered my ears, but the screams just got louder. I tried to run away from them, but no matter where I went, they followed me. Eventually, I came to a clearing, and in the middle of it was a large lake of fire. People were floating in the lake, and their screams were the loudest of all. I watched in horror as they were consumed by the flames. I tried to turn away, but I couldn't. I was frozen in place, unable to look away from the suffering. The longer I watched, the more I felt myself sinking into the ground. Soon, I was up to my waist in the ground, and the screams were coming from inside my head. I don't know how long I was in that place, but eventually I died. I don't know how I know that, but I just know. As soon as I died, the pain stopped and the darkness faded away. I found myself back in the light, and I felt someone's presence with me. I turned to see who it was, and I saw my grandmother. She had died a few years before, and I was surprised to see her there. She told me that I was in heaven now, and I felt a sense of peace wash over me. However, she also told me that I had to go back. I didn't want to, but she said I had to. She said that I had a purpose to fulfill and that I wasn't done yet. I asked her what that purpose was, but she just smiled and said I would know when the time came. Then she gave me a push and I woke up. I was back on the mountain, and my friends were gathered around me. They told me that I had been unconscious for 2 hours, but it felt like minutes to me. I don't know what happened to me during those 2 hours, but I do know that I will never forget it. I can't help but wonder if what I saw was really hell, or if it was just a glimpse of what's to come. Either way, I know that I don't want to go back there. My husband won't get off the fence. He was a handy guy, my husband. Always had been. Whenever there was a problem around the house, leaking pipes or a busted boiler, he would wrinkle his nose in disgust if I dared suggest we call a plumber. "I'll do it," was all he'd say before donning a tatty pair of overalls and digging out whatever tools he needed from the attic. His hands were big and rough and constantly glazed with a persistent layer of dirt, reflecting the years of hard labor he'd endured throughout his long career. I'd always loved that quality about him. Not the dirty hands, mind you, that I could take or leave, but the ability and know how to start a project and see it all the way through to completion. It was something I deeply admired. That was until he hatched the bright idea of replacing the fence in our backyard. "Anyway, this one's rotten," he informed me one day, running a grubby hand over the faded orange paint. "If we don't get it replaced, it'll likely be coming down on its own soon enough. We'd best get ahead of it." "All right, I'll do it." And so he got to work. First, he tore down the old, admittedly flimsy eyesore and drove new posts deep into the soil, accompanied by many assurances that this won't be going anywhere. He loved a good project, but something in his eyes told me he'd been enjoying this one a damn sight more. I kept him fueled with sandwiches and coffee and practically had to drag him into the house when the sun went down. "But it's almost done," he complained. "It isn't going anywhere," I laughed, "and you can't operate on caffeine alone. You need sleep." And so, pouting like an overgrown child who just had their playtime cut short, he wolfed down supper, took a 2-minute shower, and clambered into bed alongside me. When golden sunlight tickled my eyelids open the next morning, I sighted Paul's vacant side of the bed and threw back the covers to follow his lead. I breezed through my morning routines and descended the stairs to wash yesterday's dishes. I looked up at the window to check on Paul's progress, and paused. He was out there all right, but he was sitting precariously atop the fence. I frowned through the blinds with my hands submerged in a soapy sink, unable to fathom what on earth he was doing up there. I palmed my hands dry and headed outside to find out. "Hey, Lynn," he called out cheerily when he saw me coming. "Look, "The fence is done." "Yes, Paul, I can see that." I smiled. "But why are you sitting on it?" The smallest shadow of a falter passed over his grinning face. "Oh, you know, I was on the fence about getting up here at first." He threw his head back and roared with laughter while I stared incredulously up at him. The time to stop came and went, but Paul just kept on laughing. When it finally faded to a breathless wheeze, he was forced to clutch at the top of the fence to save himself from tumbling backwards. His cheerful demeanor cracked for the first time, giving way to a choked panic that even the near fall didn't constitute. His eyes went wide and he panted with the effort of digging his heels into the wooden panel. "Oh," he chuckled nervously, "that was close." "Paul, what's gotten into you?" "Nothing, darling. Just admiring my work, that's all." His tongue probed the cracked surface of his lips. "Would you mind bringing me out some water?" I shook my head but did as he asked. When I handed him the cold glass, he carefully distributed his weight so he could lean down to reach it, then straightened up and gulped it down in one go. He handed back the glass and I stared at it for a moment, unsure of what to say. "I'll call you when dinner's ready, okay?" Paul nodded down at me with a smile that seemed somewhat forced before I turned and headed back inside. I whittled down the hours tackling chores around the house I'd been putting off for a while, humming upbeat songs and contemplating anything at all as long as it wasn't Paul and his bizarre behavior. When the ticking clock could no longer be ignored, I bumbled around the kitchen, subconsciously stretching each stage of food preparation well beyond the time frames I had come to expect of myself. More than that, I was fervently avoiding looking at the window while simultaneously wondering why. It was fear, I realized. For one reason or another, I was terrified that I would look up at that small rectangle of glass to see Paul still out there perched atop the fence. I scolded myself. I was being silly, I knew that, and yet still I didn't look. Only when his dinner sat steaming on a plate with a can of cold beer standing neatly beside it could I finally mold my voice into words. "Paul," I called through the open back door, "dinner's ready." For a moment there was no response. I stared at the beam of evening light stretching from the doorframe across the kitchen tiles, muttering a prayer that his soggy silhouette would appear there. "Hun, would you mind bringing it out here?" I froze and gulped back a pocket of air. How long was he going to keep this up? Why was I going along with it? Why did my hands shake so violently as they grasped the hot plate? It took everything I had to place one foot in front of the other, and it wasn't until I stood in the cool shadow of the fence that I finally looked up at my husband. His wide eyes that normally sparkled a deep ocean blue were surrounded now by vivid webs of red. Tears swelled at their corners before streaking down dirty cheeks and into his smiling mouth. He reached out to take the plate from me, but the cutlery slipped over the edge and fell between blades of grass. "Don't worry about that, baby," he said as I followed them to the ground. "I think I'll stay out here a little bit longer if that's okay with you. It's a beautiful day." I glanced once more at his face, blistered from sunburn and peeling away in places, and merely nodded before hurrying away. I gnawed at my nails, dimly aware that my leg was bouncing as I watched images play across the TV screen and registered not one. My mind was focused solely on the empty seat beside me, fraught with worry and stress. But I knew where Paul was. There was no mystery there. He was outside, safe and sound, balanced atop his newly erected fence like a strangely territorial gargoyle. I grabbed the remote and upped the volume to drown out the nagging thoughts and concentrated with all my might on the celebrity couple that had just gotten back together for the 4th or 5th time. All throughout the early hours of the morning I could hear his distant sobs playing to the beat of my tears thudding against my pillow. Tomorrow, I decided. Tomorrow I would drag him down by his legs if I had to. A flash of blue lit up the curtains and a clap of rumbling thunder followed. Just not right now. It could wait until tomorrow. Heavy bags had gathered under my eyes by the time the alarm spurred me into action. I skipped my sacred routines and swept downstairs clad in naught but my nightie, knowing that slowing my pace for even a moment would spell disaster for the modicum of determination I'd spent the entire night building. I stepped barefoot on soggy grass and made myself look. As expected, Paul sat right where I left him, hair plastered over his forehead and strands soaked from the night's chaotic downpour. However bad I thought I might look, I knew it didn't compare to Paul. I marched right up to him, holding out a hand to grab hold of his shin, but stopped short of the fabric of his overalls. I looked up and clapped a hand over my mouth in a mixture of surprise and horror. Paul's face was mere inches from my own. His lips were still stretched in that horribly strained smile, but his eyes were pleading desperately. "Please," he hissed through gritted teeth. I tried. I swear I did. His big eyes followed my every move as I tried with all my heart to just reach out and touch him, but it was as if I was a protesting passenger within my own body. and there was more than air between us. "I'm sorry," I mouthed eventually, before taking a step backwards. Paul's head shook violently and tears were running freely, but the forced smile never left his lips. "That's okay, hun." His eyes darted from left to right. "I'll be inside soon." It's been a week since then. A week. For the first few days, I would take my time building up the courage to carry out some food and drink and hand it to him without meeting his gaze. Now, as dreadful as it makes me feel, I can't even bring myself to do that. He slides over to the leaking gutter whenever he needs to drink, and I've seen pigeon carcasses littering the grass around him on the rare occasion I can force myself to peel back the curtains and look. He doesn't sleep. How could he? But neither do I. Sometimes I wonder which one of us has it worse, though the answer might seem obvious. I'll try to update in a few days. Hopefully there will have been some change by then, but just to clarify, I am not asking for help. Thank you guys for watching. If you enjoyed these stories, then hit the like. See you guys next time.